Welcome back to Bible Quizzes. Today we got 80 more questions for you guys, so let's get started. 1. Who was the first king of Israel? David, Solomon, Saul, or Samuel? Saul. 1 Samuel 10:1. Then Samuel took a flask of olive oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance?" 2. Which prophet confronted King Ahab and his prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel? Elisha, Elijah, Jeremiah, or Isaiah? Elijah. 1 Kings 18:19. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. 3. In which city were the followers of Jesus first called Christians? Jerusalem, Rome, Antioch, or Corinth? Antioch. Acts 11:26. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. 4. Who interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a statue? Ezekiel, Joseph, Daniel, or Nehemiah? Daniel. Daniel 2:36. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. 5. Who was the first disciple to be martyred? Peter, Stephen, James, or Paul? James. Acts 12:2. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. 6. Which of these items was kept in the Ark of the Covenant? The staff of Moses, the manna, the stones from Jordan, or the bones of Joseph? The manna. Hebrews 9:4, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold-covered Ark of the Covenant. This ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. 7. Who anointed Jesus' feet with expensive perfume? Mary, the mother of Jesus, Martha, Mary Magdalene, or Mary, the sister of Lazarus? Mary, the sister of Lazarus. John 12:3. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. 8. What did God use to feed Elijah during a drought? Quail, manna, ravens, or angels? Ravens. 1 Kings 17:6. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. 9. Who was the mother of Samuel? Ruth, Abigail, Hannah, or Deborah? Hannah. 1 Samuel 1:20. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." 10. Who asked Jesus, "How can a man be born when he is old?" Peter, Thomas, Nicodemus, or John? Nicodemus. John 3:4. How can someone be born when they are old? Nicodemus asked. Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born. 11. Who was the judge that led Israel with a song of victory alongside Barak? Deborah, Samson, Gideon, or Jephthah? Deborah. Judges 5:1. On that day, Deborah and Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. 12. Which book of the New Testament contains the Beatitudes? Mark, John, Luke, or Matthew? Matthew 5, 3-12. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. 13. Who led the Israelites into the promised land? Moses, Joshua, Aaron, or Caleb? Joshua 1:2. Moses my servant is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. 14. Who was swallowed by a great fish for 3 days and nights? Jonah, Paul, Moses, or Peter? Jonah 1:17. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. 15. Who was the Roman governor who presided over the trial of Jesus? Herod, Felix, Pilate, or Agrippa? Pilate, John 18:29. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" 16. Who was the wisest man who ever lived according to the Bible? David, Moses, Solomon, or Joseph? Solomon, 1 Kings 4:29-30. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. 17. Who was the first person to see Jesus after his resurrection? Peter, Magdalene, John, or Thomas? Magdalene, John 20:16-18. Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." 18. What was the occupation of Zacchaeus before he met Jesus? Tax collector. Luke 19:2. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. 19. Who built the first temple in Jerusalem? Solomon, Saul, David, or Rehoboam? Solomon, 1 Kings 6:1. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Zeb, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. Which apostle was known for doubting the resurrection of Jesus until he saw him? Peter, John, Andrew, or Thomas? Thomas, John 20:25. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord," but he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." 21. Who was Jacob's first wife? Rachel, Bilhah, Leah, or Zilpah? Leah, Genesis 29:23. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. 22. Which king of Israel was known for his great wealth and building projects? David, Saul, Solomon, or Hezekiah? Solomon, 1 Kings 10:23. King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. 23. Which prophet was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind? Elijah, Isaiah, Elisha, or Jeremiah? Elijah, 2 Kings 2:11. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. 24. What was the name of the garden where Jesus prayed before his arrest? Eden, Bethany, Gethsemane, or Golgotha? Gethsemane. Matthew 26:36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." 25. Which apostle was a tax collector before following Jesus? Peter, Matthew, James, or Andrew? Matthew 9:9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. 26. Who interpreted Pharaoh's dreams in Egypt? Daniel, Moses, Joseph, or Aaron? Joseph. Genesis 41:15-16. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream you can interpret it. I cannot do it," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." 27. Who was struck dead for lying to the Holy Spirit about the sale of their property? Barnabas, Ananias, Simon, or Demas? Ananias, Acts 5:3-5. Then Peter said, "Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit?" 28. Who was known as a man after God's own heart? Solomon, David, Moses, or Abraham? David, 1 Samuel 13:14. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. 29. Who was the Ethiopian eunuch reading about when Philip met him? Isaiah, Acts 8:30-31. Then Philip ran up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. "Do you understand what you are reading?" Philip asked. "How can I," he said, "unless someone explains it to me?" 30. What was the name of Moses' sister? Miriam, Deborah, Zipporah, or Rachel? Miriam, Exodus 15:20. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels dancing. 31. How many times did Peter deny Jesus before the rooster crowed? 1, 3, 2, or 4? Three. Matthew 26:75. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times," and he went outside and wept bitterly. 32. Who was a prophet that succeeded Elijah? Elisha, Jeremiah, Isaiah, or Amos? Elisha, 2 Kings 2:9. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. 33. Who was Abraham's first son? Isaac, Jacob, Ishmael, or Esau? Ishmael. Genesis 16:15. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. 34. What did Jesus turn water into at the wedding in Cana? Milk, wine, oil, or honey? Wine. John 2:9, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. 35. Who was the priest that blessed Abram after his victory over the kings? Aaron, Jethro, Eli, or Melchizedek? Melchizedek. Genesis 14:18-19. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. 36. Who was the apostle that betrayed Jesus? Peter, John, Judas, or James? Judas. Matthew 26:14-15. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. 37. Which book of the Bible is known for its collection of songs and prayers? Proverbs, Isaiah, Ecclesiastes, or Psalms? Psalms. Psalm 1:1. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers. 38. What did the Israelites build to worship while Moses was on Mount Sinai? Bronze snake, golden calf, stones, or wooden ark? Golden calf. Exodus 32:4. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. 39. Who was the Pharisee that came to Jesus at night to ask him questions? Nicodemus, Caiaphas, Gamaliel, or Annas? Nicodemus. John 3:1-2. Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. 40. Who led the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem after the exile? Ezra, Zerubbabel, Nehemiah, or Joshua? Nehemiah 2:17. Then I said to them, You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. 41. Who was thrown into the lion's den for praying to God instead of the king? Shadrach, Abednego, Meshach, or Daniel? Daniel 6:16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. 42. Which New Testament letter addresses the fruit of the Spirit? Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, or Philippians? Galatians 5:22-23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. 43. Who was a shepherd boy who killed Goliath? Saul, Samson, Jonathan, or David? David, 1 Samuel 17:50. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. 44. Which prophet was commanded to marry a prostitute as a sign to Israel? Amos, Joel, Hosea, or Micah? Hosea 1:2. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her, for like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." 45. Which disciple of Jesus was a zealot? Simon, Luke 6:15. Matthew, Thomas, James son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot. 46. What did the Lord use to guide the Israelites by night in the wilderness? Pillar of fire, star, cloud, or angel? A pillar of fire. Exodus 13:21. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire, to give them light so that they could travel by day or night. 47. Who was the first martyr in the New Testament? Peter, Stephen, James, or Paul? Stephen. Acts 7:59-60. While they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Then he fell on his knees and cried out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." When he had said this, he fell asleep. 48. Which Old Testament book tells the story of a woman who became queen of Persia? Ruth, Judith, Esther, or Sarah? Esther. Esther 2:17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. 49. Who was the only female judge of Israel? Deborah, Miriam, Huldah, or Jael? Deborah. Judges 4:4. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. 50. Who visited Jesus at night to discuss being born again? Nicodemus, Pilate, Caiaphas, or Herod? Nicodemus. John 3:1-2. Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God." 51. How many plagues did God send upon Egypt? 7, 10, 9, or 12? Exodus 12:12. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. 52. Who was known for his strength and betrayed by Delilah? Saul, David, Gideon, or Samson? Samson. Judges 16:17. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." 53. What was the sign of God's covenant with Noah? A dove, a star, a rainbow, or a bush? A rainbow. Genesis 9:13. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. 54. Who were the parents of John the Baptist? Zechariah and Elizabeth. Luke 1:13. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to call him John." 55. Who was the king of Salem who blessed Abraham? Melchizedek, Bera, Abimelech, or Chedorlaomer? Melchizedek, Genesis 14:18-19. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. 56. Who was the disciple that Jesus loved? Peter, Andrew, James, or John? John 13:23, one of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. 57. Who was known as the weeping prophet? Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, or Amos? Jeremiah 9:1. Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. 58. Who was one of the three thrown into the fiery furnace for refusing to worship an idol? Daniel, Shadrach, Jonah, or Ezekiel? Shadrach. Daniel 3:20, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. 59. Who was the first person to come upon the injured man in the parable of the Good Samaritan? Priest, Samaritan, Levite, or tax collector? Priest. Luke 10:31. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. 60. Who was known for his coat of many colors? David, Isaac, Jacob, or Joseph? Joseph. Genesis 37:3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. 61. Which book of the Bible describes the valley of dry bones? Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, or Isaiah? Ezekiel 37:1-2. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. 62. What was the name of the city where Jesus was crucified? Bethlehem, Capernaum, Nazareth, or Golgotha? Golgotha. John 19:17. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. 63. Which book is known for its account of the creation of the world? Genesis, Leviticus, Exodus, or Deuteronomy? Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. 64. Who had a vision of a ladder reaching to heaven? Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, or Esau? Jacob. Genesis 28:12. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, when its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. 65. Who baptized Jesus? Peter, John, James, or Paul? John. Matthew 3:13-14. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John, but John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? 66. Who was the disciple who walked on water with Jesus? James, Peter, John, or Thomas? Peter. Matthew 14:29. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. 67. Who was a prophet who confronted King Ahab about his sin? Elisha, Nathan, Elijah, or Isaiah? Elijah. 1 Kings 18, 17 and 18. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel? I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." 68. Which king asked for wisdom instead of riches? Saul, Solomon, David, or Hezekiah? Solomon. 1 Kings 3, 9 through 10. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. 69. Who did Jesus raise from the dead after being in the tomb for 4 days? Jairus' daughter, Tabitha, Lazarus, or Eutychus? Lazarus. John 11, 43-44. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." 70. Which book of the Bible has the shortest verse? Psalms, John, Proverbs, or Jude? John 11:35, Jesus wept. 71. Who led the Israelites into the promised land? Moses, Caleb, Aaron, or Joshua? Joshua 1:2. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. 72. Who was a Roman governor who presided over the trial of Jesus? Herod, Pilate, Caiaphas, or Felix? Pilate. Matthew 27:24. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." 73. Who did Paul say was the mother of us all in the book of Galatians? Jerusalem above, Sarah, Eve, or Mary? Jerusalem above. Galatians 4:26, but the Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother. 74. Which king threw Daniel into the lion's den? Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus, Belshazzar, or Darius? Darius. Daniel 6:16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." 75. Who was the prophet that confronted David about his sin with Bathsheba? Nathan, Gad, Samuel, or Elijah? Nathan. 2 Samuel 12:7. Then Nathan said to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul." 76. Who found baby Moses hidden in the Nile? Pharaoh's daughter, Jochebed, Miriam, or Zipporah? Pharaoh's daughter. Exodus 2:5. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. 77. Who was a high priest during Jesus' crucifixion? Caiaphas, Zechariah, Annas, or Gamaliel? Caiaphas, John 18:24. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. 78. Who was Paul's first convert in Europe? Lydia, Timothy, Priscilla, or Apollos? Lydia, Acts 16:14. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. 79. What was the name of the field bought with Judas's betrayal money? Potter's Field, Golgotha, Field of Blood, or Gethsemane? Field of Blood, Matthew 27:8. That is why it has been called the Field of Blood to this day. 80. What was the name of the Jewish festival that Jesus attended when he was 12? Passover, Tabernacles, Pentecost, or Purim? Passover, Luke 2:41-42. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. And that's all our questions today. Let us know how you did down below and share this with your friends and family to compare your scores. Then we'll see you all in the next one.